Happy to be here. Thank you so much, Governor Shapiro, for taking the time. So, I really wanted to start off and talk about safer communities because I've heard you've been doing
Yeah.
just a whole lot around that. And, that's very important to me. A lot of folks know I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, which sadly is one of the most dangerous cities in the country. And I grew up with a lot of community violence. And, I definitely want to hear about what you've been doing to help make your community safer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I kind of begin the conversation by saying and believing in my heart, every Pennsylvanian has a right to both be safe and feel safe in their communities. And I think those things are two different things oftentimes. You can be safe because there aren't robberies and murders and other, bad things and violence happening in your community. But you got to also feel safe when you see a police officer, when you call 911, when the fire department shows up, you name it. And I think folks have a right to both. And the issue is how you create that balance by making sure that your citizenry is safe, but also that your police and others in law enforcement look like the communities they're sworn to protect, that they're properly trained, that they have adequate resources, and that there's real dialogue in between those communities. And that is not something that is easily attainable, but it's something I'm striving for every day as governor. I just unveiled a budget not too long ago that did invest more in hiring more police, but also making sure that they go through a higher level of training, making sure that we have more 911 operators so they can dispatch, whether it's police or mental health professionals, in a more timely manner that seeks to address some of the inequities in our justice system. I'll give you just one. We are one of only two states in the whole nation that doesn't fund indigent defense. Let me tell you what indigent defense is. That's public defenders. We don't fund that at the state level. And so it's up to every county to do that. And therefore, you end up with total inequity in the system where you have some counties that put a lot of money into indigent defense and others that put very little. So I'll be the first governor, assuming we get this budget passed, to fund public defenders from the state level. So I share those as just a few examples of making sure that people both are safe and feel safe in their communities. It's going to take time to pull this together, but I think we're off to a good start in making critical investments to accomplish both. I recognize that there will be some people on this TikTok that maybe disagree with my calls for more police. At the same time, there may be some who think it's not enough or who disagree with some of the criminal justice reforms that I'm for. The key is striking a fair balance where people are seen and heard and respected no matter what they look like, where they come from, who they love, or who they pray to. They have a right to be safe and feel safe here in Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm really glad to hear about what you said about public defenders. There is a friend of mine who is actually on TikTok and social media. You may have come across her named Eliza Orland, and she is a New York public defender. So she sees it all, and she
Well,
really pushes for funding of public defense. And a lot of people don't realize how important that is for everything from preventing that school to prison pipeline and for addressing those inequities you talk about. Because I think a lot of people, a lot of governors come in, and the first thing they want to do is they want to fund a prosecutor. They want to fund the DA harder. And so to hear that you're going to make that change and fund public defense is amazing to hear because so many people forget that that is, I mean, it's a cornerstone of our justice system, or at least in theory, it's a cornerstone of our justice system, but in practice, it hasn't been played out. It's been very inequitable. So I am glad to hear about that.
it has. And if I may just add something to that, Elizabeth, I'm sort of an unlikely champion of public defenders. For those of you who followed my career prior to this, I was the top prosecutor in Pennsylvania. I was the attorney general of Pennsylvania. And I just saw too many cases make their way through the system where the person, when they were initially charged with a crime, didn't have, adequate counsel. Maybe it met the legal standards of adequacy, but you just know that if that counsel had greater resources or fewer cases on their desk, they could have been doing a better job, or they could have, been able to fight a better fight. The key to our system here is giving everyone adequate representation. It's also about making sure and you'll forgive the sort of colloquialism here, like a fair fight in the courtroom. And
Right.
when you're only investing in prosecutors and you're not investing in public defenders, you're not going to have that fair fight. You're not going to have that balance. And I think with that balance comes just outcomes. Sometimes results in a conviction and other times an acquittal, but you need that balance to make sure we get it right.
Well, speaking of safer communities, I'm going to move to a bit of a heavier topic that I'm sure is on your mind. I'm sure you're aware of what happened in Louisville, Kentucky today, that there was another mass shooting. Um, I've mentioned to you before, offline that that is a very sensitive and sore subject for me because unfortunately my brother almost 6 years ago was a victim in a shooting back in my hometown of Memphis, just walking to his car. And gun violence is something that is, I think, personal and important to a lot of Americans. I know for those of us who are either victims of gun violence or families of victims, it just hits us even harder. And then, of course, I'm from Memphis, and you see, I'm sure, what's happened with two of our state reps in Tennessee, Justin Jones and Justin J. Pearson, who were expelled for speaking out against gun violence. It is extremely disheartening to see that swept under the rug over and over and over again. And so I just want to know what you plan to do as governor to address gun violence.
Well, look, from Memphis to Louisville, just a few hours ago, to seemingly every single day on the streets of Philadelphia, the level of violence, gun violence that we're seeing, we have to begin the conversation by saying it doesn't have to be this way. Meaning we don't have to accept this as normal. I think there's too many politicians who just say, well, it is what it is, and we can't address it. And the reality is, and I think you probably agree with this, um, there's no one bill or one appropriation that's going to fix it. But it's a series of things that you can do, but it has to start with saying, we're not going to accept this. So, what would we do? We have to put lots more resources into community based violence prevention initiatives. And my budget does that. We have to put more resources into policing in areas where you're seeing repeat violent offenders who shouldn't be on the streets wreaking havoc in our communities. We have to make sure that mental health issues are not used as an excuse for inaction on passing gun violence prevention bills, but actually addressed in a multitude of ways. I want to put a mental health counselor in every single school building in Pennsylvania. We're funding that in our budget. I want to make sure that there are mental health professionals that get sort of wrapped around police when they go out to make calls where mental health services are needed. I think it's critically important that those mental health issues go addressed. I think it's really important that we have stricter gun laws in this country. We need to have universal background checks to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and those who don't have the mental capacity to own a weapon responsibly. To anyone on the other side who doesn't want to do anything to combat gun violence when it comes to keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, I ask, why are you working so hard to defend a criminal's right to bear arms and use those arms to harm others? To me, that just makes no sense. We can respect law-abiding gun ownership, and I certainly do, and it has a rich heritage and tradition here in Pennsylvania. But we can also do that and want to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. We can't allow inaction to grip our politics and to grip this situation. We have to do more. And I think those are just some of the things that we need to do to approach this. A multi pronged approach to combat things from a violence prevention perspective in the community, mental health, stricter gun laws, and then, of course, investing in things that can lead to violence in the community, poverty, a lack of educational opportunity, a lack of economic opportunities, job opportunities. Those things are not going to make change overnight, but investing in those things, as I've proposed to do as governor, will have an effect in the long run.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because I think I've mentioned, one of the hats I wear is public health practitioner, and my specialty, my research is in community violence and creating trauma-informed systems. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, trying to create trauma-informed systems. I know people in the comments are talking about NRA and having to have cohesion with the state background check systems. I do want to remind folks, though, this is a Pennsylvania governor, so he can set the tone for his state, but he can't make those federal level changes. So I do understand why your focus is on those community based violence intervention programs, because addressing poverty, addressing the root issue, we see time and time again that that's what's important. That's what's going to help prevent these issues in the long run.
I agree. I do think it's important, and you may disagree with what I'm about to say, and you should challenge me on that if you do. I think that we there are those who are out there who just say we need 100% law enforcement response and that will solve this. They're wrong. And then there are those who say law enforcement has no role. We should only put money into programs and other initiatives like I was claiming or I was laying out. And they claim that that's the only way to address violence. I think they're wrong. I think it has to be balanced. I really think you have to have both. I think we have to make sure that those root issues, right? Poverty, lack of quality education, that gets addressed, that the investment in communities gets addressed, and that you have properly trained, adequate law enforcement to take those who are wreaking havoc on our communities out of the communities. And I think that together, if we could all come together around that common sense proposal, that would lead to safer, healthier communities.
Well, I do push back on that only because I said time and again that unfortunately the police systems at their root, I mean, it's a fact that the police systems in the United States, of course, are rooted in slave catching, returning slaves, and there's a systemic racism that's threaded throughout. So I think you do have quite an uphill battle with reforming the police department. I commend you, though, for like having that hope and the effort to do that and, trying to do that. I truly don't know if it is possible, but I have a lot of hope in what you're doing as far as the community-based resources. I do think that that's going to be a big help and
Yeah,
help change things at that level. But to switch topics a bit, because we don't have much time, I do want to bring up another issue that's important to me as with my other hat as a public health lawyer. Um, what happened in Texas on Friday? We saw that a Texas federal judge decided to put a block on the FDA's approval of misoprostol, which is the abortion pill. And they, put the decision on hold for 7 days to give the Trump administration time to appeal. They did file their appeal in the Fifth Circuit on Friday, but
Biden.
oh, excuse me. Look what I did.
Yeah,
That is a what am I thinking of? A Trump appointed judge, but the Biden administration appeals. I just said it backwards. Thank you. The Biden administration filed the appeal in the Fifth Circuit in order to challenge what the Texas judge did in blocking the FDA's decision on the abortion pill. And I wanted to know what you're going to do, to help protect reproductive health in your community, and also to give you a bit of feedback that was given in the comment section before you joined, to encourage you to continue to say things like reproductive health and not women's health and be more inclusive in the language. I believe you have been in a lot of your advertisements and things like that about the programs in Pennsylvania, but to remember that this also affects trans and non binary citizens as well. But I just wanted to ask what you're doing in Pennsylvania to help protect reproductive health in your state.
sure. And look, this has long been an issue I've championed, protecting that right to make decisions over your own body. I believe abortion is health care, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that it is legal, safe, and accessible here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it will be so long as I am governor. There are several things that are important to note on this case. And then let me talk a little bit about some of the actions we took earlier this morning. There were actually two cases. You referenced the Texas court decision by the Trump appointed judge, as you said before. There was also, within hours, I mean, minutes, actually, I think it was, a case coming out of Washington State that had the exact opposite opinion. And in fact, Pennsylvania was a party to that Washington case. In that case, holding that mifepristone is in fact legal. The actions taken by the judge in Texas are really shameful. I respect that he's a person of deep faith, and I respect the fact that he claims his faith teaches him that he should not have an abortion or support having an abortion. But he does not have a right to impose that religious viewpoint on everyone else. And he's just flat out wrong. He's wrong morally and he is wrong legally in this case. So here's what we are doing in Pennsylvania. We don't believe that that opinion even applies to Pennsylvania, given the Washington case. Number two, as you stated, there's like this 7-day, we call it a stay, but basically a wait. And the Biden administration, if they haven't already, presumably will appeal. And I would assume that that appeal will trigger another stay. So in effect, there'll be no legal change while this makes its way through the system. Now, you never know what is going to happen in the U.S. Supreme Court, given the fact that this is the same Supreme Court that wrote the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. So what I want people in Pennsylvania to understand is that you still have the freedom to make decisions over your own body. And we launched a new website today, pa.gov/freedom to choose, where you can go and you can find an abortion provider. You can find resources on how to pay for that abortion. You can learn more about your reproductive health care choices and options, no matter what zip code you're in Pennsylvania. pa.gov/freedom to choose. I don't know how to put it in the chat, but maybe you could or someone else could.
So, yeah, if one of my mods wants to put that in there, p8.gov/freedom to choose. It is also now in the link tree in my bio. You can get to that from both TikTok and Instagram. So I'm going to leave that there. I know that it is Pennsylvania specific, but I encourage everyone to go check it out. And of course, if you're in a different state other than Pennsylvania, you can see if there are other resources for your state that would help. But definitely for the Pennsylvania residents, it is in my link tree.
And I would say for those of you who are not from Pennsylvania, if you border Pennsylvania, you can access reproductive health care here in our Commonwealth. And if you're from another state, encourage your governor there to launch a website like this. I believe California did something similar. I don't know if other states have done this. There may be. I just am not aware. This is something that should be available to everyone in every state across this country.
And I appreciate you doing that. I know that reproductive health, like you said, with the Dobbs case, is very scary right now, very uncertain. And so thank you for taking a lead in that and taking a stance against such an egregious decision. And I think I have just one more topic I wanted to touch on briefly because I found this to be a very progressive stance of yours. So one of the first things you did when you came in office was you said that as governor, you are not signing off on any executions. You have taken a stance against the death penalty. A lot of people will be surprised to find, especially since I'm a family member of a murder victim, that I am not for the death penalty. I'm actually against it. I, as a lawyer, don't understand how it's not an Eighth Amendment violation, to be perfectly honest with you. Um, and that's because we've seen far too many exonerations, far too many people on death row who shouldn't be there. And my stance is like, if there's one innocent person who would die at the hands of that system, a system that we've already seen has been sadly unjust in the many ways we talked about earlier. We're talking about public defense and things of that nature. Then it's not a good system to have. You can't take back taking someone's life. And so I just want to know, as governor, like, what was your thought process there, and why was it so important to you to make that statement as soon as you got into office?
If you don't mind, I'd actually like to take you back to when I was Attorney General, because I think my evolution on this issue began then. Um, I ran for Attorney General back in 2016, and I'm going to be very candid with you. When I ran, I was a candidate who supported the death penalty, and in my words, I said in only the most heinous of cases, right? And I'll tell you what, Elizabeth, I believed that when I said it. I mean, I really believed it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. And then, as Attorney General, case after case came across my desk. When I was given the choice as to whether or not to seek the death penalty. And I could never do it. I just couldn't. And one night, my then roughly 10-year-old son saw me or heard me talking to someone on my team about a case. And he asked me about it, and I said it had to do with the death penalty. And he asked me what the death penalty was. And I explained it to him in an appropriate way to explain to a 10-year-old, which is really hard to do, Elizabeth, as you can imagine. And my son said, wait, so you mean to tell me that the penalty for someone who killed someone is for you to kill them? And I just kind of like looked at my kid and couldn't really answer them. I mean, a kid can really, especially your own kid, can kind of get right to the heart of it. And I
Hmm.
was embarrassed as a father that I couldn't look my son in the eye and answer that question in a way that was satisfactory to him. Now, I didn't change my position that day. I continued to think about it, and I continued to grapple with it. And then when I was running for, and throughout my entire 6 years as Attorney General, never sought to impose a death penalty. When I was running for governor, it was not a big issue in the campaign, but it came up, and someone asked me, a local reporter asked me, and I said that I was not supportive of the death penalty after what I learned as AG and what I had sort of experienced. But to be honest with you, Elizabeth, it wasn't big news. I mean, there weren't wasn't a lot of attention on that issue. I was about 2 weeks into my term as governor. This is only a month or so ago, maybe a month and a half ago. And the first execution warrant came across my desk. Here in Pennsylvania, in order to have someone be put to death, the governor needs to sign off on that. Like literally needs to sign the execution warrant. And I couldn't do it. And rather than just sort of quietly putting that piece of paper to the side, I wanted to give a speech about it and explain to the public where I stood, because now, as long as I'm governor, if I'm not signing those execution warrants, no one will be put to death on my watch. Other governors and others who have looked at this, I know, have urged lawmakers to reform our capital punishment system, to fix it, if you will. And I actually reached the conclusion that it's not fixable. And that the Commonwealth should never be in the business of putting people to death. And so I not only announced that I would not sign execution warrants, I respectfully called on the legislature to abolish the death penalty, not reform it, abolish it. And that is a very long answer. I apologize to your
No.
question, but I wanted folks to know how I evolved in it. I know in politics we're not supposed to ever change our minds or grow or learn or what have you, and as a result change your positions. I changed my position on this, and I really view it differently now. I also respect the fact that you, as a victim, as a family victim, I should say, um, have the view that you have, because that is emotionally, I believe, a very hard position to construct for yourself. And likewise, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are victims and others out there who vehemently disagree with me and you on this. And I'm someone who's always championed the rights of victims throughout my career. I'm going to continue to do that. I respect the fact that we may, not you and I, but me and they may disagree on this issue, and that's okay. I get that. And I'm going to seek to be as respectful to them as possible. But I think it's really, really important to, acknowledge that there are victims kind of on both sides of this issue who have really strong feelings. And I've heard them, pro and con, and I respect all of them.
Yeah, it is hard emotionally to come to that place. I can't say if like when everything was fresh, if I really had this kind of clarity right after my brother was murdered, but I can tell you, I'd already graduated law school. I'd graduated law school right before all of that happened. And, from the standpoint of a lawyer, from the standpoint of just seeing, I don't know if you know the story of Purvis Payne, but that was a big issue that was in Tennessee where he was on death row for basically no evidence at all. And then once they found DNA evidence, they said there's no way he could have committed this crime. And looking at that man, all I could think was, how is that any different from my brother being murdered? Even if he's murdered by the system, it's two innocent men,
Right.
right? So I appreciate that stance of yours. I know that you're very limited on time. I just want to ask if you have anything else you want to say or any closing remarks you want to have, and just thank you for coming because this has been a great conversation.
Look, I appreciate you and your willingness to speak out on issues and to gather this following that you've gathered. And I'm really glad to be able to meet you in this space and to have the opportunity to talk to you and talk to others, who want to learn about this. I have found this space on TikTok to be really engaging, and folks want to learn, and they care deeply about the world that they live in, the city that they live in, the Commonwealth, the country, and So I just want you to know that I appreciate you inviting me on in this space to have the audience. I think it's really important that we keep this conversation going. That you stay close to Gavin on my team. I want you to know I don't know if we're the only governor's office set up this way, but we have an entire sort of digital team that is just focused on meeting folks like you where you are, not just hoping that you'll read about something in the newspaper, no disrespect to newspapers, but actually meeting you where you are and letting you ask the questions and making sure that your followers get a chance to engage. And so I hope to be able to come back on, talk to you more, and I hope that when issues come up, by the way, that you agree with me on or disagree with me on, that we're the opportunity for this kind of dialogue. I think it'll be great.
Well, I will say that I'm just really excited to see what else you do as governor. So far in office, I've just been really excited. I know a lot of the followers and commenters have said that they are so proud. So many people who said they voted for you, and they're even more proud now that they see what you've been doing and excited to see what's to come. So thank you so much. Of course, I will stay in touch with your digital team. They have been excellent. And yeah, just thank you so much, Governor Shapiro, for joining us. And I hope you have a great Monday.
Thanks. You too. See you, everybody. Bye bye.